We now talk about MiFID II, trends, challenges and opportunities, and I have here Mark Alexandrian, professor for accounting and finance, and the floor is yours.
Fantastic.
Good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here, despite this is probably one of the last sessions today. I just want to start my talk by thanking, first of all, Lorna and her wonderful team for organizing, the big part of this research survey that we carried out, or have been carrying out for the past 3 months. Without her support, that wouldn't be possible. And by way of introduction, this is a joint work, still at an early stage. This is a joint work with my co-author, Professor Kenneth Lee from Loughborough University. And as the title suggests, we're looking at the impact of the MiFID II, the regulation that I'm sure all of you, or those who have at least been in the profession for more than 6 years, are very well aware of. And so we're looking at, essentially what we've already done, we have carried out a survey and in-depth interview-based analysis, perceptive study of investor relations in the UK as to how MiFID II, in their view, has changed their practice, the ecosystem of their engagement with the sell side, with the buy side, as well as their own and all activities. But we were kind of confined to the UK case, and so we thought, well, we need to find out how things are happening across Europe. And so with Lorna's help, we've organized the survey of the Swiss investor relations officers. And I'm sure there are people in this audience who have actually responded and completed some of the questions that I'm going to cover through today. So what we found in the UK was general that after MiFID II, because of the impact MiFID II had on the displacement of the sell side from the triangle of the interaction between the corporate and the buy side, the investor engagement with the buy side has increased incredibly, and also the role of the IROs has gone up internally and externally. And we thought, look, let's go and now see whether we observe the same sort of situation elsewhere in Europe, and so Switzerland is our sample now that we're looking at. So just maybe a couple of sort of slides first as to what has been the overall impact of MiFID II on the perception of IROs here in Switzerland and the UK about the relative importance of IRO and IR function for your companies. So if you look across these charts, you will see that the perceived importance of IR function after MiFID II has gone up. More than or close to 50% of IROs have reported, both in the UK and Switzerland, that now we are perceived by our own C-suites as being more important, being more influential within our companies, and our role has increased. And that also sort of is mirrored in the amount of time now and the workload that IROs are having. So that has really gone through the roof. So compared to what IROs have been doing or how much work they've been carrying out before MiFID II, to what's happening right now after MiFID II, IROs are much busier. So I'm going now to dive into some of the effects that have contributed to this change in IROs' role and importance, as well as the level of busyness of IROs. So the first thing we've looked at the impact of MiFID II on analyst work. I'm pretty sure many of you have your views and have experienced changes in your interaction engagement with the sell side, as well as have views about the changes in the quality and coverage of sell side analysts on your company. But what we are finding here is the first two charts. If you look at them, there is an interesting comparison between the UK and Switzerland. So in the UK, what we found is that the coverage of analysts did change, but that change was sort of bifurcated between the large cap companies and smaller companies. So FTSE 100 versus FTSE 250, for instance. So the coverage of larger companies has gone down quite significantly, whereas the analyst coverage of smaller companies, FTSE 250 in our case, hasn't sort of gone down. So about half of our respondents said, yes, experienced a drop in coverage, and the other half said, look, no, actually our coverage has gone up. So if we look across what's happened in Switzerland, we do see overall that both across the large and small size companies, there has been a reduction in analyst coverage. So this is a sort of a point of difference that we're observing here. The next question that we were interested in, okay, well, now we see that the coverage has changed for the better or worse, but what do you think? Is this a good thing for your company or the bad thing? So in the UK, in this chart on the right-hand side, what we saw is that overall IROs were not dissatisfied with this drop in coverage, and we attribute it to the overall research glut that was there in the UK market pre-MiFID. So MiFID, in a way, kind of calibrated, sort of took out those redundant analysts and redundant research that wasn't necessarily adding value. Whereas in Switzerland, what we see, okay, still, a sizable minority of IROs are finding that, you're satisfied with the coverage, but there is also a sizable minority of IROs who are commenting or saying that, look, we would quite like more coverage. So that also suggests that probably in Switzerland to start with, prior to MiFID, the coverage wasn't that, or wasn't perceived as being more than enough. It was probably just about right. In terms of research quality, there is quite a consistent pattern both in the UK and Switzerland. Also, when you bifurcate it by large versus smaller companies, we see that there is a massive reduction in the perception of IROs in terms of the quality of the research that analysts produce. And that also relates to the quantity, or in other words, the frequency of the research notes that analysts produced on the regular basis for the companies they cover. And again, this pattern is consistent across the countries as well as the size groups of companies. The one important question is there, okay, well, if the analyst coverage has gone down in general, and if the quality has gone down, what about the level of knowledge of those remaining analysts about the company? And what we saw is, as we can see here, is a massive reduction, quite a sizable reduction in the perceived knowledgeability of the sell-side analyst about the companies that they are covering. Okay, and this could be attributed to one particular phenomenon, post MiFID, because of the sort of unbundling of the research and trade execution fees. What's happened? The budgets for the research have gone down, and a lot of the more expensive, highly rated analysts either exited the field or they migrated and joined the buy side, and the buy side internalized a lot of the sell side, previously produced sell side research internally. And so what's left in the market essentially is what we call juniorization of analysts. So analysts increasingly became more junior because they're cheaper, and also they were asked to produce more research, cover more stocks, and that resulted in perceived lower sort of a quality of the research they produce. So this explains some of the findings that we have here. One other interesting aspect is that the access of companies, i.e. IROs, to analyst research that cover you guys has also gone down. So you now have, according to the data, right? Not necessarily your particular company, but it looks like IROs now have less access or less knowledge about what the sell-side analysts are telling the outer market, the buy side, about you, right? There is less visibility on the part of IROs about the messaging that sell-side is sort of channeling into the buy side, to the investment community. Now, let's briefly touch on what's happened on the buy side. So also a couple of questions about the effects on IROs' relationships with investors, with the buy side. So what we see here in these graphs is that the direct engagement of IROs has shot through the roof, as you can see in this middle bar here. And this is persistent both across the UK and Switzerland. So there is much more direct engagement and interaction between IROs and your investors, the buy side, compared to how things stood before MiFID II. And this is quite nicely explained by the fact that now sell-side analysts are essentially no longer there to the extent they used to be, and therefore that direct messaging and direct engagement with the buy side is much more prevalent now. And this direct engagement is a sort of a two-way process. It's not just that you are receiving more queries, more inbound inquiries from the buy side, but also you are engaged in much more direct targeting of your investors, prospective investors, or talking with existing investors, bypassing this analyst channel. So there is a direct engagement. So from the perspective of IROs, this might be good news, because now you know your investors much better. You speak with them. You can, channel or craft your corporate story and deliver it directly to your investors. But if you take a step back and look at the overall market for information and the fairness of market, you would see a reduction of publicly available information, that is sell-side research. And therefore, arguably, yes, for companies or some companies, that might be good news, that you're connecting directly with investors. But for the broader ecosystem and the broader, public market for publicly available information, that's not necessarily a good news. And with this increased direct engagement with investors also comes the amount of time that now you are having to spend with investors, with the buy side, to educate them, right? Answer their queries, bring them on board with your, the corporate story, to educate about the company's strategy, etc. And we have throughout the day had a number of wonderful presentations about how important that is to craft your story and use the right means to deliver that story to investors for their decision making. So to conclude with a couple of other slides, what we ask at the end of the survey is we ask the IROs to give us one or two most salient kind of effects that came on the back of MiFID 2. And we asked that same question, obviously, both of the UK investor relations as well as the investor relations officers in Switzerland. And what we got is quite a consistent picture in terms of the main themes or topics, albeit some topics were more prevalent in Switzerland, in Swiss responses, others were more prevalent in the UK. But if I could maybe just look at the Swiss responses, so what has been, as perceived by IROs, the most important change after MiFID 2 in this space has been the increase in direct engagement or targeting of investors. That theme is also present in the UK, but not necessarily the most sort of salient one. And we could see that there are maybe one or two themes that are present amongst the Swiss respondents, but not so in the UK. If you sort of look at this greenish sort of column of data here, in Switzerland, it was particularly strongly mentioned that the research coverage of smaller companies has gone down, right? See, this is not what we observed in the UK, but in Switzerland, this is quite prevalent, that after MiFID 2, smaller companies have actually lost out in terms of the coverage and the availability of research. And finally, we asked the question, again, directed at the IROs, as to what is it that the regulators, if we could influence the regulators, what is it that they should do, right? I was quite surprised by the answer, and we had to do some sort of textual analysis because this was an open-ended question rather than multiple choice question. But essentially, looking at the first block, that's the most prevalent theme, and I could summarize this long text there in 2 words. The perception of Swiss IROs in its prevalence could be expressed in 2 words: scrap it. Scrap it. Or some people actually quite use this word, scrap it. Some said ditch it, which is obviously the same thing. But even the longer answers, like 2-3 line answers, could be reduced to that very meaning. So we want to go back to the pre-MiFID era, where research was bundled, where we knew what analysts were telling about us to the buy side. We were better covered. The research quality has higher, etc. Another interesting theme is that if scrapping it is not a solution, then at least in the Swiss context, the regulators should develop and design some sort of mechanism that would allow better coverage for smaller companies by designing sort of pay structures that would enable that process. And final point that was raised by a few, that we need a bit of harmonization. It's not good in a globally connected market where, in the UK or more generally in Europe, you have to abide by MiFID II, whereas you don't have to in Asia or in the United States. So it's a quite complex regulatory settings, and a lot of IROs would value some sort of harmonization of the reporting regime, regulatory regime. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you again for your attention. Thanks for listening. Just briefly to mention that we're also involved in a couple of other research projects involving IR professionals, and one is on the IR and artificial intelligence. Okay, so we are hoping to do another survey on that particular topic, as well as more in-depth research interviews. So taking this opportunity, I would like to beg your cooperation, because we will probably be contacting some of you to engage with us on this research project, or if you feel some sort of emotional attachment to the topic of AI and the future of work, please do get in touch with us. Okay, thank you very much.